Today, we interview Michael Crook, son of legends Isabella and David Crook, about their lives before the end of World War II. Hey, everyone. My name is Jason Smith. I'm originally from sunny California. Now I'm living in beautiful Beijing. Michael Crook is the son of David and Isabella Crook, both prominent foreign educators who dedicated their lives to China. Born in Beijing in 1951. Oh, I got that correct.
Yes.
Michael spent the majority of his life in China, deeply involved in educational and cultural exchange initiatives. Michael is critical to the International Committee for the Promotion of Chinese Industrial Cooperatives, Gung-ho, or ICCIC, an organization his parents supported, which focuses on grassroots economic development in China. Thank you for joining us today.
May I start by explaining what the connection between Gung-ho and ICCIC is?
Absolutely.
Well, the Chinese word for industrial is 工业, work is 工, and cooperatives is 合作社, cooperate is 和, so 工和 means work together. In other words, cooperation.
And cooperatives are wonderful. They're becoming popular in the West, where cafes and small industry, of course, Mondragon, other experiments around the world where cooperatives have worked. Huawei is a cooperative of types. It's almost entirely owned by its employees, which I think is why it's so versatile. You and I went last year to a Museum of Foreign Friends here in Beijing, where you gave special insider's tour of some of the famous figures in China. There was a tour guide. I felt sorry because as soon as she started speaking, you realized you knew a lot more, and you actually sort of took over the tour, which was amazing. And there are all these people, 20, 30 people looking on, recording with their phones, because you have these amazing stories about what foreign figures who were living in China in this mid-20th century. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about some of them today.
Sure.
Let's start with John Leighton Stewart. Could you tell us about this gentleman?
Well, he, like my mum, was born of missionaries. Well, my mum's parents were Canadian missionaries. His parents were American missionaries. So he grew up in China, but similar to so many of the children of the missionaries, Mish kids, they would do their early schooling in China, but then they would go back to the home country for college at least. And some of them would come back. And he was one of those, well, as was my mum. And he came back, and I guess he just loved China. And he amazingly decided to start a sort of a Western liberal arts college in China. And he did so much of the work, getting the land from some warlord. We're talking about, after the overthrow of the last imperial Qing dynasty, there was a republic proclaimed called the Republic of China, but in fact, it was not a centralized government. There were warlords, and different provinces were all divided and so on. So wars were going on right until the late 20s, civil wars. And during that period, he came to Beijing, and he persuaded some warlord who had a conscience to donate land, and then made a generous cash donation as well. And he started this, what initially was called Peking University, but then there was also a state university called Peking University in English. So it's Cai Yuanpei, who was the president of the state university, discussed with John Leighton Stewart, say, look, let's not have the same name in English. So Leighton Stewart dug this word Yanjing out from ancient, before China was unified in 221 BC, there were about 7 major states, and Beijing is located in what had been the state of Yen, and so the capital of Yen. So Yanjing University, which actually the name lives on in the Harvard Yanjing. There's a library, for example, in Boston now called the Harvard Yanjing Library. So he started this, and he became the first president in, I think it was 1919. And the the university very quickly became a top institution, and many famous Chinese, Ling Qiaozhi, Dr. Xie Bingxin, the writer, Huang Hua, who later became vice premier of People's Republic of China, and so on. So he loved China. And then, of course, during when the Japanese invasion happened, well, it started, of course, in the early 30s, but Beijing fell in 1937. And many of his students were patriotic and decided to leave. In fact, I don't know how many people have heard of the American journalist Edgar Snow. Mm-hmm. Edgar Snow was living in Beijing in the 30s and learned about the communists who were resisting Japanese aggression in northwestern China, in Shanxi province, Shanxi, Gansu, Ningxia, and so on, and decided to go there to interview Mao, of course, and a group of people who finally founded the new People's Republic of China. And it was one of John Leighton Stewart's students, Huang Hua, who accompanied Edgar Snow to Bao'an, around Yan'an, and wrote a book called Red Star Over China, which had massive influence. In fact, I sometimes say, perhaps a little facetiously, if that book hadn't appeared, I wouldn't be here today.
Why is that?
Because, of course, the Japanese invasion happened 1 year after the Franco's fascist uprising in Spain, and my dad, like many others, decided to fight fascism in Spain, and he joined the international brigades, and my dad was wounded in the Battle of Jarama, which was defending Madrid, and he was recovering from his injury in Madrid in a hospital where he met a very famous Canadian in China, anyway, Dr. Norman Bethune. And the English-speaking circles, this was in 1937, were interested in the world, the war against fascism all over the world, because, there was a Manchurian incident in 1931. The League of Nations came and did an inquiry and found that this, so there was, and then of course Ethiopia, Abyssinia under Mussolini tried to, that was in 1935, and of course I should think many people know that Picasso made this famous painting called Guernica, which was, to show the total havoc of Nazi and fascist bombing of, I think that was in the Basque Country and so on. So anyway, a lot of people who wanted to fight fascism went to Spain. My dad was wounded, and the English-speaking circle in Madrid at the time, with Dr. Bethune and so on, they got a hold of a copy of the book Red Star Over China, which was published in London in 1937. So they had a sort of a reading club, and the book got passed around, and my dad read the book and became very, he thought that the heroic long march of the Chinese communists from the south up to the north to try and fight the Japanese, because the Japanese invasion, of course, they took Manchuria, the northeastern three provinces, in 1931, and then there was Marco Polo Bridge incident. Anyway, so they came up, and Dad was so filled with admiration and decided, next stop, China. And it was in China that he met my mum. He came in 1938, met my mum, and so had he not read the book, he might not have come, and I wouldn't be me anyway. Maybe if my mum had a child, or my dad had a child, there'd be someone else.
Let's move on. We have a lot of different figures I want to cover. There's a gentleman named Ernest Ralph Lapwood.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about his story?
Yeah, well, Ralph Lapwood, he was British, and he came out to China. I'm not too certain why they came, but, in the 30s, with the rise of fascism, in Hitler and so on, there was quite a left movement. Perhaps some people have heard of the Cambridge spies and so on. Who
I haven't.
Oh, you haven't?
Sounds exciting, though.
Oh, these students, Cambridge students from good families, I think that saw the rise of fascism and felt that something should be done, and the Soviet Union was out there, and then some of them became spies for the Soviet Union. Kim Philby, you haven't heard of these people?
No,
Whoa,
no.
well, anyway, Ralph Lapwood, I think for whatever reason, he came to China in 1932 to teach. He had majored in mathematics, and he taught in a British school in Shanghai, and then later on he came up to Beijing. And he worked in this Yenching University in the Department of English. So he was one of the staff for John Leighton Stewart. And as I mentioned, in 1937, the Japanese military took control of Beijing. But at that time, Brits were not enemy aliens because Japan was not in a state of war with Britain, and because the Axis Pact, of which, of course, Germany, Italy, and Japan, they were working together. But it was not until 1939 when, Hitler Germany invaded Poland and sundry countries. And, of course, then Churchill made his famous speech about, the state of war and so on. So then, at that point, Japan simultaneously was at war with Britain, and the story goes that they sent a contingent out to Yenching University, which is actually outside of the city. It's close to the Summer Palace. Those who have come to China, if you leave the city where the Forbidden City and Temple of Heaven and all those things are, well, it's about 10 kilometers to the northwest. So I guess the Japanese had to head out there, but word got around that they were coming. And John Leighton Stewart, who was American, and he didn't have anything to fear because war with the state of war with the U.S. didn't happen until Pearl Harbor, which was a couple of years later. So John Leighton Stewart very kindly warned some of these people. And actually, there were others. There was another Brit by the name of Michael Lindsay, Lord Lindsay.
I'm not sure. I didn't know he was Lord.
Yeah, Michael Lindsay, Lord Burker. Anyway, but that's not really significant.
So where did they hide?
Yeah, shall I? No. Well, let me tell you. So Michael Lindsay and Ralph Lapwood and actually there was another Brit called George Hogg. And anyway, there were a bunch of people who had to flee. And in the case of Michael Lindsay, Leighton Stewart got his chauffeur-driven car and lent it to him. And the story goes that the Japanese were entering the south gate of the college while he was fleeing from the west gate.
Wow.
And you see, the western hills of Beijing are another, say, 10, 15 kilometers from Yenching University, which is now Peking University. And they fled to the hills. The Japanese forces, is very hard. The hills around Beijing, well, I say hills. For a Brit, they're mountains because the Western Hills.
Phoenix Mountain, that area.
Yeah, right. Oh, Phoenix Mountain, right there. Behind there's a Dongningshan, which is over 2,000 meters above sea level, which is, 2 or 3 times higher than the tallest peak in Great Britain.
Wow.
So we're talking mountains. And there were guerrillas fighting the Japanese. There were a few battles actually fought in West Beijing. And so there was a guerrilla force called the Pingxi Youjidui, the Beiping. The nationalists had moved the capital city to Nanking, so Nanjing. So, and since Jing means capital city, when the capital left Beijing, it was no longer Peking. It wasn't a Jing, so they called it Beiping. So West Beiping guerrilla area started right at the foot of the hills. So the car. Apparently, the car broke down before they quite got to the hills, but then they went on foot. And so people like quite a number of Westerners actually left Beijing and worked their way to unoccupied China through the Western Hills, connecting with the guerrillas.
Wow.
Yeah. George Hogg, who is a person I greatly admire. Can I say something about George Hogg?
Of course.
George Hogg came from a rather middle-class family. I think it was in Norfolk, in Britain, and went to university, Wadham College. I majored in physics, and so for me, Hooke's law, for springs, that was where Hooke was, Hooke was a contemporary of Isaac Newton, so we're going back a bit. But anyway, back to the present. George Hogg finished his college in Wadham College in Oxford, and he was a very international-minded young man. He had studied in Switzerland, I think he'd been to South America, was aware. Anyway, his aunt, who was Muriel Lester, was a famous pacifist, a friend of Mahatma Gandhi. Anyway, so I don't think she ever married. So I think he was one of her favorite nephews, and decided upon graduation to take him on a world tour. So this is 1938. They left Britain, and going around the world by ship, they put in at Shanghai, and I think it was in the summer of 38. Actually, it was the same year that my dad arrived in Shanghai, but they missed by a couple of months. So they put ashore in Shanghai, and of course, a middle-class Oxford grad might have just gone to, say, I don't know, Sassoon Mansion, the Park Hotel, and enjoyed the Pearl of the Orient and so on. But he was a very caring person, and he saw the Japanese left the international settlement okay, but there was bombing, there was killing, he saw some atrocities, and he decided that, anyway, so George Hogg, I guess this left such a trauma, maybe that's not the right word. Anyway, he was deeply affected by what he saw. Well, a few days later, back on board ship with his aunt Muriel, and off they went to Japan. But in Japan, I guess he was thinking, and he just said, "Nope, I'm going to drop this world tour and go back to China because I want to do something." So he left his his aunt. I said grandma because my grandma knew Muriel Lester. So he came back to Shanghai. In Shanghai, he met up with other sympathetic people like the New Zealander regales, he also went to Wuhan. The Japanese had bombed Shanghai starting in 1932 and so on. And he traveled to Wuhan and did some writing. He was a correspondent for Western British papers. And so he wrote touchingly. And I think he got a bit sucked in. And then next thing was he asked regales, he said, I want to do something. And at that time, the Gung-ho movement. So we started with Gung-ho. Can I just do a little backtracking on what Gung-ho was?
Yes.
Yes. So why cooperatives and why 1937? In 1937, with the all-out invasion of North China and lots of bombing of the coastal industrialized areas of China, skilled workers were out of work because their factories and homes were destroyed. Many of them decided to flee the occupied coastal areas of China and head out west to what some called free China. Well, anyway, unoccupied China. Now, masses, I mean, in the last few years, we've seen a few wars that have led to Syria and so on, a number of countries where vast numbers of refugee people fleeing war. Now, what do? Now, of course, after these days, there's this UN High Commission for Refugees and UN, and sometimes you get refugee camps and food and so on is airdropped, and they're looked up. There's some people. Well, China in 1937, there was no such thing. What to do about it? And here I just come back to, I'm so happy that you started with Leighton Stewart, because here's another connection. A couple of Americans were living in Beijing in 1930s. There was a journalist called Edgar Snow, whom I'd mentioned with the Red Star over China, and also Helen Foster. The two of them met and married in China, actually. Now, Helen Foster came from Utah, from a farming family, and they had cooperatives there.
Wow.
I mentioned cooperatives because the modern cooperative movement, I'm being British, I'm very proud that the co-op principles that are now ensconced in the ICA, the International Cooperative Alliance, they sort of largely date from 1844, the Equitable Pioneers Cooperative that was founded in Rochdale near Manchester. So they had all these principles, and I think, and Helen Foster, I think, got this idea, this is the story, that what do you do about refugees who have nothing to live on, no capital, well, organize them into cooperatives, help them become productive, not only so that they could earn a living, but also produce goods. Because after the Japanese occupied the coastal areas where the manufacturing bases were, even daily items like soap and so on, and so they started this cooperative. She and Edgar Snow got this idea. They went off to Shanghai to check with a few people who had some practical experience. And here again, there was this New Zealander called Rui Ali, who was a factory inspector in Shanghai for the international settlement there, and he visited. He was a very clever. I mean, jack of all trades is not a nice word, is it? But he could do. He was a man who could fix machines and built. He'd been a farmer in New Zealand. I guess he could shear sheep. He could fix farm machinery and so on and so forth. And he knew the workers. He was a man of the people. So when they came to him with this idea, I think he was much taken with this idea that, and then he had good friends among the Chinese patriotic, Madame Sun Yat-sen, for example, Song Qingling, and her sister, Song Mei-ling, and so on. After the Japanese all-out invasion, the communists and the nationalists, who had been fighting each other in a civil war, decided we should form a united front, a coalition to fight Japan. So they were working together, and the nationalist government, I think, were persuaded that this was a good idea, and H.H. Kung, who was finance minister, found some money to support, and CIC, China Industrial Cooperatives, was formally established in Wuhan because Nanjing had already fallen by that time. In 1938, And so they got capital, the idea, and they got organizers. The organizers, of course, foreigners helped, but most of the work was done by Chinese. Here I might mention that I have a few people that I really admire. Chen Hansen, for example, was a very smart fellow who had studied abroad in Berlin and visited England and so on. And so there were many patriotic Chinese who threw themselves into this CIC. So that was China Industrial Cooperatives, Gung-ho. Now, my committee, Jason, you started by introducing me as the ICCIC, International Committee for the Promotion of Chinese Industrial Cooperatives. So we were an international support group for CIC. So
you say were, so your function has changed.
Well, I'm saying that's how it started. So CIC was registered, founded in 1938. Then the story got around, partly because people let me mention another person I admire, Evans Carlson, who became a general. He was an American soldier here in China, traveled around, and he saw the guerrilla tactics being employed by mainly the communist forces in North China. Hit and run tactics, because they were no match for the equipped Japanese. Had their tanks and their airplanes and the whatnot. But these were people with they might have rifles and grenades and stuff, but they hit and run. And so Carlson saw this and was greatly impressed. And later, when he got this word gung-ho. I'd say he was the one who really brought this to the consciousness, and the word made its way into, I think it was Merriam-Webster dictionary was the first one to adopt the word, but because when he was transferred to the Pacific Theater, he started a group of raiders, the Marine Raiders, Carlson's Marine Raiders, and their battle cry was gung-ho. Anyway, oh dear, I'm drifting a bit. Better get me back to focus. Well, but what I'm doing is I'm trying to say that there were a bunch of that this what some call the Second World War. Second, okay, it's a serial number. Obviously, it implies there was a number one sometime before and so on. But what was the nature of the war? It doesn't say anything. I prefer the term that is gaining usage in China called the World Anti-Fascist War. And this, because it really, that war, there was Hitler and Mussolini in Europe, and then there was Japan out east, and eventually, how many continents were embroiled in it, I love Humphrey Bogart movies, and I see those To Have and Have Not, and so that stuff, the Caribbean and Africa, Rommel and so on. So, well, I guess Antarctica was never affected, probably, but I think most of the other continents got embroiled. So it really was a world war, and the special feature was anti-fascism. And the number of foreigners, like I said, so the gung-ho movement became an inspiration, and many people heard about this. Oh, well, there was a Hollywood movie made about Carlson's Raiders called Gung-ho, the old Hollywood movie.
Well, I was actually speaking with Evelyn McInnes last night, and I mentioned I was going to speak with you today, and she, and her family has also lived in China for a great deal of time. I'm speaking with her husband next week, Peter McInnes, who worked with the OSS and the Flying Tigers. What I see in the connection between your story and their story is that all of these foreigners were in China and in some way supporting China's resistance to fascism.
Well, I think that, there's that. Some of the support was from foreigners who happened to be in China and saw these atrocities, and who, I guess some people see an atrocity and and they just flee to somewhere else. But then there are also brave, righteous people who think, well, let's do something about it. And some of them were in China, but it wasn't just those who were in China. Many of them heard the story, and the story was taken to them. For example, I had mentioned Carlson, Rui Ali, Edgar and Helen Snow, but then James Bertram. He was a New Zealander writing for a British paper, and these people, and Carlson, Bertram, and so on, they went, for example, to the Philippines on a sort of I guess you'd now call it a speaking tour, but it was to take the story of what was going on in China. And one thing about the Philippines, there's a massive overseas Chinese population there who care. Okay, they might be first, second, even third, fourth generation Chinese, but the motherland's in trouble. Some of them were business people. They gave generous donations. So, and of course, and if I now go on to the US, there were many, there were Chinese who went to help build the railways back in the 19th century. There were a Chinese community there, and they cared about it. And there was a movement called the Bowl of Rice movement. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't. I'm curious.
Yeah,
Please tell us about it.
These days, people...
Your answers are more interesting than my questions.
Oh, dear, I'm drifting. But, if anyone wants to do a charitable thing, my students at Western Academy for a good cause, might do a bake sale or charity dinner or something. Well, the Bowl of Rice movement, this happened, it started in California, actually. The idea was, if you care, we're raising money for China to help China, defend itself, and you sign up for a dinner and pay a generous subscription for the dinner, and then you go and all you get is a bowl of rice. So the difference went to support the cause. And much of the bowl of rice, a lot of the money came to Gung-ho, but it was used to buy medical equipment. Very little actually went to weapons of destruction. It was not a killing thing. I should, at this point, I should also mention, you mentioned the Flying Tigers. Well, a lot of Americans who were not in China, they were not children of missionaries or anything, they saw what was going on and they just, jolly well thought they might come and do something. And volunteers came. And that's the story of the Flying Tigers with General Chenault and so on. And he married a Chinese too, so there was love involved as well. But let me, being British, I want to put in a word for the Friends Ambulance Unit China Convoy. The Friends, meaning the Quakers, who are pacifists, don't believe in killing, but they do believe in, saving, and whatever. The Friends Ambulance Unit had originally started in the First World War. It was about Florence Nightingale, goes even further back. But the China Convoy was hundreds of young British people decided, they were mostly conscientious objectors who didn't want to kill, but they thought they'd come to China, the China Convoy, and money was raised to bring ambulances, and they went to the front. They were brave people, risking their lives to save the wounded and so on. So I think Flying Tigers from Americans, the Friends Ambulance Unit from Britain. There were others. The Soviet Union also. In fact, more than the Flying Tigers, I think that a couple of thousand airplanes were given to the Chinese by the Soviets to help them, and pilots. So it wasn't just equipment.
This is shocking because they were dealing with so much. The Soviet Union, their fight in Europe was the most brutal in Europe.
Well, that came a little later because there had been a pact,
Right.
And
so this is the interim period.
Yeah. So, and in fact, one reason why the Flying Tigers were very openly American. They were larger than life. They painted their planes with the shark's teeth and so on. It was very, very. The Chinese were the ones who said Flying Tigers, the word, because tigers, they're. But when the Soviet donations were given, Soviet Union was supposedly not involved.
Oh, I see.
So their planes were they given the national were all painted over with the nationalist flag, so that the Japanese, so that they could not be accused of getting involved. So it was in, when was it, June 22nd, 1941. Hitler started the Eastern Front, Europe's Eastern Front, and attacked the Soviet Union, and that's. That started a whole new thing. But I do want to say one more thing. Back to the World Anti-Fascist War.
Yes.
Like I said, a lot of people who wanted to help defend democracy in Spain joined the international brigades, and these included a lot of doctors. They included Dr. Norman Bethune, he was in Spain, but a whole lot of other doctors from Hungary, Bulgaria, Poland, Germany, and so on. These, so a lot of doctors were in Spain, but of course Franco unfortunately took control by 1938, and these members of the international brigades were interned in a camp in France, and there. I want to mention the Brits again. There was a friend of my parents called Arthur Clegg, who was a national organizer for something called the China Campaign Committee, which were Brits who saw what was going on and wanted to help the effort, China's resistance. And they got this idea, well, here are these anti-fascist fighters sitting around in this internment camp in the southern, I guess, by the Pyrenees, and they're just sitting there. They could be put to good use on the Eastern Front in China. They raised money, managed to persuade the French authorities to release a whole group of doctors, none of whom were Spanish, but came to be known as the Spanish doctors because they had come from Spain, and the Brits paid the fares. They boarded ships in Marseille, sailed off to China, and then. I guess landed in Hong Kong. This is before, because Hong Kong didn't fall until, late 41. So, so they came to China and then up to Guiyang in Guizhou province, where the International Red Cross was cooperating with the China Red Cross to help China. And these Spanish doctors, they were. Some of them, they stayed and fought through the war. Well, I say fight, I mean
Saved
their
lives.
way, they saved lives. Yeah. Some in the communist areas, some in the nationalist areas, and some of them went back to their home countries after victory, which we're celebrating 80th anniversary of the victory of the World Anti-Fascist War. Some went back and some stayed. Some of them married Chinese. Some just became... in fact, in connection with this year's commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the victory of the World Anti-Fascist War, I have been involved in helping to invite some of the descendants or family members of these people, because here are some people who they quite rightly are proud of their, whether it's father, grandfather, great-grandfather, or whatever. And I'm happy to say that I have connected up with some great-grandchildren of some Spanish doctors, and they'll be traveling out to Beijing.
Wow.
Gung-ho, my ICCIC, we're going to organize some commemorative events, and I hope to get together with them and sing some of those old Spanish Civil War songs. Freiheit.
Wow, that's it. Well, speaking of, well, we don't have.
And the Friends Ambulance Unit people too.
Oh.
No, obviously, it's the children or grandchildren. Yeah.
One more doctor, since you're on the topic
yes.
of doctors. Dr. Richard Frey. What can you tell?
Yes.
Frey.
Dr. Frey, that wasn't his name, actually. You know that the German word frei means freedom.
Oh.
Yes, so he was given that name by General Xiaoke when he came. So anyway, back to the person that is mostly known as Richard Frey. He was Austrian and Jewish, and being Austrian and Jewish, you can imagine why it was a bit
Go
hot,
somewhere else.
You know, you want to better leave. He left Austria and first went to Switzerland, I think, but then he worked his way over to China. China was actually, this is worth mentioning, the Jews in Nazi-occupied Germany, which extended beyond Germany, you know, they took over Austria and so on. The Jews, well, besides gas chambers and so on, the Holocaust, in some of those early years, some of the Jews were permitted to leave Germany on condition that they left their wealth behind.
Wow.
And on condition that they could get exit visas, or some country that would issue a visa assuring them that they could go somewhere would take them. Sadly, America and a number of countries were not very eager to take these Jews, but the Chinese nationalist consulate in Germany had some very sympathetic consular officers who were readily gave visas to Jews to travel to Shanghai. And there a very large number of Jewish people managed to leave Nazi Germany and avoid the gas chambers and Auschwitz and all that by going to. I mentioned, let me say, Hans Müller, for example, was a German Jew, also a doctor. He came. Oh, another Austrian, Ruth Weiss, also Austrian. She got out and came to China. She met Song Qingling. She joined Madame Song Qingling's China Defense League, and also later joined Gung-ho. Her son, by the way, who's a couple of years older than I, will also be coming to China for the marking the ceremonies. Oh, I think it's very touching that so many of these that war was something that brought so many right-minded people working together, and which is what Gung-ho means, work together.
Right.
And I look forward to, the world is not peaceful now. There are wars going on. And I think that if peace-loving people and right-minded people were to, that gung-ho spirit.
Yeah.
If that would be so wonderful.
Well, let's back up. You've talked about your father, but I think if I'm not mistaken, your mother is much more famous, as far as I understand. Could you tell me how did your mother originally come to live in China?
Yeah, well,
Isabel.
I mentioned, so my mother, actually, she didn't come to China. She was born in China. Her parents were just like John Leighton Stewart. Her parents were missionaries. So my grandma and grandpa were Canadians. They didn't know each other in Canada, although they had attended the same college, Victoria College and University of Toronto. But they heard the call. They were, they were devout Christians. And actually, they were admirers of Gandhi, so they're sort of pacifists. They were education missionaries. They had both separately majored in education. Grandma in early childhood education and grandpa in more higher education. They came to China 100 and whatever years ago, and grandpa came out to China and was appointed Dean of Education in the West China Union University, which was founded by Protestant missions in Chengdu, and I think it was founded in 1912. And grandma came out the following year, and the two met, fell in love, and worked in it. Grandma, I'm very proud to say, started what I believe and is widely believed to be the first Montessori kindergarten in China in 1915, and went on to found, so Montessori, famous early education person, and then also the Dewey Practice School, the Dewey School after the educator John Dewey. So a primary school, and my grandma served as the headmistress. Americans call them directors or anyway, head of school for some years. The Dewey Practice, I say practice school because this was related to what my grandpa was doing, because the education department, School of Education, was training teachers, and teachers need to have a place to practice, to do internships and so on. So actually, both the Montessori school and the Dewey school were supported and funded by the West China Union University and my grandpa. So they worked together. Anyway, so Mum was born in China in 1915 and brought up in this family of educators. It wasn't just them, even her grandma, my great grandma, came out to China and taught French.
Wow. Well, can we just back up for a second? I want to come back to your story. I'm sorry for interrupting. I go travel to Beijing Foreign Studies University sometimes to meet U.S. students who are coming to visit Beijing. And I always visit the museum there.
Yes.
And there's pictures of your mom everywhere. What's the connection?
Yeah, well, so grandma and grandpa were teachers. My mum then trained up in Canada, and she got a degree in education, early childhood, and so on and so forth. And after the war, during the war, my dad had taught in St. John's University in Shanghai in the 38 to 40, and then in Jinling University from 40 to 42. But that was when the two of them met. My mum wanted to be an anthropologist and did quite a lot of anthropological work. But then back to the war. So during the war, they decided they wanted to join up, and the two of them Mum having fallen in love and decided to, team up with my dad. They went to Britain, and Mum joined the Canadian Army and my dad joined the Royal Air Force. So from 42 to demob after the war, they were soldiers. But then they came back to China, where they had met in the first place, and which both of them were just, I guess they just loved China. They came back and to do anthropology originally, and wrote some books about land reform and so on. But then they were invited by, there was a border region government in the, started something called the Central Foreign Affairs School. So they were invited to teach at the Central Foreign Affairs School. This is 1948. And so they became teachers, willing, unwilling, anyway. And then, you see, this was a school founded by the Chinese communists. And 1947-48 to 49, there was a civil war between the nationalists and the communists. And in 1949, the communists won out. And very soon took control of the whole of China's mainland. And this school, which was out in the sticks at the time during the war, they had to flee bombing and so on, and conduct classes in gullies and so on, and that sort of thing, and they lived in villages and so on. But when Beijing was liberated and then made the capital, so it was then became Peking again, they came to Peking, and then it became the Peking Foreign Language School, Peking Foreign Languages Institute. Eventually it expanded. So when they started teaching, there were about half a dozen teachers, teaching staff, with about 20 or 30 students. Now, eventually, this thing grew through mergers and so on to become the Beijing Foreign Studies University, one of China's leading universities, thousands of students. Anyway, so they were teaching here. And I guess one reason they became famous is that this being one of the leading institutions for foreign language and culture teaching, some of their students became top diplomats and so on and so forth. And so recognition at a rather high level, eventually leading. So, for example, they were given all kinds of awards by prime ministers and whatnot.
I want to ask another question because I think it's interesting for me. So it looks like your parents both had a great deal to do with the development of educational institutions and a lot of the people you've mentioned. But you also, isn't there a school that you founded here in China as well?
I founded. But with some friends.
With some friends.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. So as I said, great-grandma, grandma and grandpa, mum and dad, 3 generations of education workers. And then I tell you what happened was that in 1993, China's reform and opening up, a lot of people know that in the 50s, 60s, there were very few Westerners in China because, well, the geopolitical situation. But by the end of the 70s, U.S.-China relations diplomatic relations were established. PRC joined, became a UN member, and so on and so forth. And so in the early start, all through the 80s, the foreign community started growing. Expanding, and of course foreigners, whether business people or diplomats, often come with children who need schooling, and putting them in the local Chinese public school was not really a good option for most of them, I would say. And so there was a need for English language based Western style education. And actually an American friend came to me and said, we're going to start a school here. You want to help? And so, why not? And I thought, well, yes, grandma, grandpa, mum and dad, they all helped to start schools. Why not me? And so we worked, and we were I think very lucky and successful. The Chinese talk about 天时地利人和, the right time, the right place, the right people. It all came together. And the Western Academy of Beijing was founded in 1994. It opened with about 100 students and very quickly grew to have over 1,000 students. Started with only a primary school, elementary school. And now we go all the way from kindergarten, which has a Montessori element in it, although we don't call it a Montessori school, all the way to high school graduation. And I'm proud to say that Western Academy of Beijing, WWII for short, and WWII high school graduates have gone on to, well, I don't want to just boast about Ivy League, Yale, and whatever, but they've gone on to do great work. I'm very proud of the Western Academy of Beijing. One thing we like to do is, I feel that whatever the reason for the relocation to China of the parents, because it's not the kids who choose to come, it's the parents. And the parents, they might be sent here by Shell or Motorola or GE or whatever. And now we got a big bunch of people with the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIB, or the UN or whatever. Actually, the largest single contingent in my school, in terms of employer, is the U.S. Embassy. So they come to the WWII, and I think we have a good product. And one thing I like to stress is the Chinese, Chinese. Well, I was brought up in China, so I can't help it. I just love Chinese culture, including traditional Chinese, ancient Chinese culture. And so one of the great civilizations going back thousands of years, and I think any family that comes to China, if they don't, absorb a little bit of this fantastic culture, it would be such a shame. So some schools, what they do is they offer China studies or Chinese language. And I feel, well, that's one way to do it. We certainly offer Chinese language. It's compulsory for all the elementary students. But instead of offering, like, say, every third period on a Tuesday is Chinese, whatever, what we do instead is try and integrate Chinese culture across the curriculum so that whatever the subject being taught, you can always bring China in. If you're doing music, well, you can do violin, but what about the erhu? And if you're doing sports and whatever, sure, a lot of the rules for whether it's basketball or whatever, rules. Well, what about Chinese kung fu?
Okay, I want to switch back to the main track here. A lot of people, well, not a lot of people, very few people, foreigners living in China, have won the Friend of China award. But your mother won a much more prestigious award, which was personally awarded by President Xi Jinping. Could you tell us about what she was awarded for and what that was like?
Yes. Well, as you say, there's something called the Government Friendship Prize, which I feel very proud. I received that in 2004, but there are hundreds of them. In fact, there might be cumulatively over 1,000 Friendship Award winners now over the last decade or two. But there's something called the Friendship Medal, 友谊勋章. I think that there's no more than, I doubt there's more than 20 total given out, and they're given out by President Xi Jinping for people who have made significant contributions to friendship. Now, friendship covers various spheres, so that some, a friendly country, the president might receive something, or a French or whatever former prime minister. And so there's political people, there are people who work in science, always in connection with, China is with the world in, whether it's Beijing has hosted the Olympic Games twice, and so whatever domain. So when I look at the various spheres in which friendship medals have been awarded, I'm proud that my mum, to date, is the only one who was given a friendship medal in the sphere of education. So that was what she was recognized for. Of course, there were many others who made contributions to China's education. My dad died 20 years ago, so he didn't live long enough to be considered. But my mum certainly. And I think part of the award was because some people joined the thing when the going's easy. But if you went through the hard times, they started teaching during the war. They had to flee bombing to conduct classes. Mum had to write textbooks because there were no textbooks around there. They had to scrounge around and handwritten. To this date, if you go to the history, the school history museum, you see early things, mimeograph. I don't know if people know what mimeograph is. It's an early form of reproduction before, well, of course, there's carbon paper. If you can have a sheet, and then let's say you have 5 sheets of white paper, and between every 2 sheets you put a sheet of carbon paper, and if you write hard enough, you can make your letters go right through. They get fainter and fainter and fainter. But mimeograph is a way to reproduce maybe up to 100, 200 sheets by rolling ink through the scratches made in a sort of waxy paper.
Wow.
Anyway, so mum, and as I said, when they had no school buildings, living in peasant homes. The teachers and the students were all doing homestays in farmers' homes in the early days. So I think the recognition is, and then to do that maybe for a few months or years but my mum, she just, she persisted. Can you imagine starting teaching in 48, then through the decades, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Yeah.
Well, I mean, my last question is more about you, because I'm kind of curious. You know, your mother, she's born here.
Yeah.
And she's raised by people living here. And then you're also born here.
Yes.
And so how did your parents, their decision to live in China affect your decision to continue to live in China?
I don't know if you've heard the term third culture kid. Have you?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, we have that in the United States.
Oh, yes,
there's
of
plenty
course.
of Chinese folks
Because there's
that live.
so many well, this is something in sociology, I think, that whenever look at the last century, when Ellis Island was welcoming people from Europe or all over the place, you know, they come with one culture, they land in another culture. Are they, you know, what do? Do they tell their kids, now we don't speak German anymore because you're Americans, and so on? So the issue is, if you come from a family from one culture and then you spend your formative years in another culture, which are you? Are you the...
Well, you can answer, right?
Well, I'd say, is your culture that of your parents, or the home country, so-called, or the birth country, or the country where you grew up? And the answer is neither. You're actually a mixture, and it's a third culture. I mean, if you take a little, take a little acid and a little alkali and mix them, well, you get something that is neither acid nor alkali. And so third culture kids, they have many things in common, actually. Some statistical studies have been done on large groups, and one of the findings is that some never forgive their parents not being whatever did you come and get me born here or for, and they go back to the home country, and that's that. And my Aunt Muriel was like that. I think she left China when she was old enough, and she never came back.
You know what I find interesting? I've spent time with you,
yeah,
and you speak fluent English, obviously. You know,
yeah,
it's obvious to anyone's ear instantaneously that your English is just perfectly fluent. But I also see you also speak perfectly fluent Chinese, and you understand the culture and the insights, and you were raised here to some extent with Chinese people. And you, in fact, the name of this show is The Bridge, The Bridge to China. Yes. And you, in fact, are kind of like a living bridge.
Yeah. Well, here I go back to, so one is about the third culture kids. Some of them just go back to the home culture, the parent culture. Some decide this is it. I mean, you look at John Leighton Stewart, with whom you began. He was born here, he went to the US, he came back. He stayed just as long as he possibly could until, sadly, he had to leave. My mum was one of those who it had to be China. And I think some of it is to do with personality and so on. Some people love stability and don't like change. Some people are thrilled and excited by change. The greatest change in China over the last 100 years, from a pathetic, one of the poorest countries. I don't know if you did a sort of per capita GDP index, China must have been sort of at the bottom, let's say 50, 80 years ago, and suddenly, society has changed. I'm like that. I'm like my mom. I think it's so exciting. I went to university, and I lived a number of years in Britain, and also I taught college in the US. It was very pleasant. Wellesley College, very beautiful place in Massachusetts. But, I just felt I was in suspended animation. I want to get in. You know, I come here, I get involved in Gung-ho, I help to start a school. I said, well, you started an NGO that helps to protect the environment, the Jane Goodall Institute. And so, you know, China is a place, if you want to do something, and I'm not talking about, well, there are those who want to make a lot of money and come and start a business. Well, that's, if that's what you want, you know, it's not what I want. But yeah, I just love it here because there are many things I don't like. But, you know, when you see something you don't like, are you going to run away or are you going to say, well, let's do something about it? And I feel really, I love it here.
Thank you so much for your time, David Crook.
Michael Crook.
Oh, sorry, let me say it again. So thank you so much for your time, Michael Crook.
Thank you.